All right, we're straight up at the time, so let's go ahead and get started. Good day. I am Dr. Ernest Gunasekara-Rockwell, editor of the Journal of Indo-Pacific Affairs and director of the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers. Now we'll be chairing this session, the Indo-Pacific Region. I want to thank the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, particularly Dr. Jaiswal, for this fantastic opportunity to work with a panel of esteemed colleagues. Please allow me to introduce the panelists and their wide-ranging topics. First, Dr. Elena Goriacheva, Research Fellow at the Institute of History, Archaeology, and Ethnology of the Peoples of the Far East, Far Eastern Branch, Russian Academy of Sciences, will present on Japan's new strategy for Japanese-Russian relations. Is it an effective tool to solve foreign policy issues? Next, Dr. Bharti Chhibber, Professor, University of Delhi, will present on the EU's Indo-Pacific Strategy and India-EU multilateral engagements in the region. Next, Dr. Peter Harris, Associate Professor of Political Science at Colorado State University, will present on US foreign policy and the Indo-Pacific. Next, assuming we get her here, Professor Tanushree Sarkar, Assistant Professor, Ramsaday College, University of Calcutta, will present on the emerging maritime security environment of the Indo-Pacific region, role of India as a net security provider. That will be followed by Artyom Garin's presentation. He's a research assistant for the Center for Southeast Asia, Australia, and Oceania at the Institute of Oriental Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He'll be presenting on Pacific Island countries, prospects and challenges for Indo-Pacific in 2021. And finally, Dr. Aparajita, Assistant Professor, BD College, Patliputra University, will present on Bangladesh, Quad, and China's insecurity. Just a quick note on time discipline. The organizers have instructed session chairs to adhere to a strict time management. Each panelist will have 7 minutes to make their initial presentation, and I know that's not very much. But however, following our last presenter, we will turn to questions from the audience, which will give you an opportunity to flesh out your perspectives a little bit more. During the presentations, please, to the audience, ask your questions in the chat section. And without any further ado, I turn the floor over to our first panelist, Dr. Goriacheva.
Thank you so much, dear organizers, dear colleagues, so that to let me speak at this distinguished conference, and I would like to share my presentation with you, and will be very grateful if you tell me if you can see it now. So I will share my screen. Is it okay? Can you see that? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So I will follow. As I was presented, the subject of my research and the subject of my today's presentation is Japan's new strategy for Japanese-Russian relations. Is it really effective tool to solve foreign policy issues? So that is bilateral problems with Russia, political ones. And here you have a historical outline for Russo-Japanese territorial dispute. And I should say that it was divided into several steps, several periods. For more than 70 years after the end of the Second World War, Russia and Japan still have an unsolved problem. That is, peace treaty between two countries has not yet been concluded. The official position of Japan is that territorial dispute over the South Kuril Islands should be solved first in order to proceed conclusion bilateral peace treaty. And during this Soviet era, USSR refused to recognize the existence of this territorial dispute with Japan, and Mikhail Gorbachev, the first USSR leader, was the last USSR leader, was the first to recognize this problem, and he started talks with Japan in 1991. The actual bilateral negotiations had been held since that time, but they didn't seem to be successful. And while at the beginning of the 21st century, bilateral dialogue was active thanks to the very popular at that time Prime Minister Koizumi and new to policymaking President Putin, who agreed to almost all Japan's initiatives, the but the situation became stagnated because there were not visible compromise solutions. Then later in 2008 till 2012, Putin's successor, President Medvedev, as a policymaker, seemed not to be able to make serious political decisions due to the phenomena of so-called tandem regime, when he obviously had to get approval for every decision from Putin. And that Japan at that time, several weak Democratic Party leaders changed, so Medvedev had taken several trips to Kurils, the first leader of Russia. But later there was some progress in 2012 till 2020, when Russia and Japan were under administration of strong popular leaders like Abe and Putin. However, it became difficult to Japan to negotiate with Russia because Japan couldn't obviously afford any significant compensation or of territorial loss for well-developing economics of Russia. And also there was last milestone, that is amendments to Russian constitutions in July last year, that was new Article 67 that stipulated that no part of Russian Federation can be given to any other countries, only demarcation can be the solve of the problem. So now that in July 2012, Russian government approved these amendments, and in Japan, the long term of the Abe cabinet is over, it's necessary to create and discuss predictive model of Russian-Japanese bilateral cooperation under these circumstances. And what is offered now by Japan? In fact, economic cooperation between Russia and Japan gained new impulse by the announcement of so-called 8-point cooperation plan by Japan's Premier Minister Shinzo Abe since May of 2016. It aimed to establish more mutual economic ties between Japan and Russia, including development of the Far East and Siberia regions of Russia. And the implementation of this plan was specified in a number of agreements and visit of President Putin to Japan. Japanese mass media called this plan aimed at strengthening economic cooperation with Russia, on one hand, so-called breakthrough, and on the other hand, only the first step in resolving the territorial issue. And this strategy for the implementation of joint projects was aimed at creating comfortable environment for cooperation in Russia based on mutual trust. And the goal of this strategy was, in the long term, to promote a positive reaction from Russia during negotiations on the South Kurils. So the economic basis for the future political dialogue. So you can see 8 points of this plan. I will not list them because all of you can see them on the screen, and I can share my presentation later to those who want to admit it. And then a few words about the efforts of the Japanese think tanks and enterprises to find out what the Russian market is look like. So you can see a SWOT analysis chart prepared by IRENA, that is Economic Research Institute of Northeast Asia, that analyzed the Russian market in its best and at its maybe weak points of view here. So you can see that despite even in the under the circumstances of COVID, still we have some opportunity for all for the promotion of all these things. So I will come to the conclusion of my presentation. So despite the close correlation with the political environment, Russian-Japanese economic relations in the second decade of the 21st century, they continue to develop. But the dynamics of this development, it's a pity, continue to remain insignificant. Over the past few years, Japanese businesses in Russia in general and in the Pacific Russia, which is Far East in particular, has received a positive impetus for development in the form of support from the Russian government. That is preferential taxation regimes attracting foreign investors, so-called priority social and economic development areas, Freeport of Vladivostok. And Japanese government also had done a lot, so informational support for enterprises wishing to enter Russian market, promotion activities of the Japan centers and Japan consulates general in Russian cities. However, Japanese business circles, they took these initiatives with caution. And in terms of the development of cooperation after 2016, economic dialogue between Japan and Russia has intensified among small and medium-sized enterprises. So that can be a solution, not to go through very large-scale projects, but to start with the small one. And maybe our countries will be successful, as Prime Minister Abe said, just to develop a background basis for mutual trust, starting from economy and then go to the political dialogue. And that's all for my presentation. I will be grateful for all your questions regarding it, and I would like to share if it's possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Goriacheva. Very interesting, and I do hope that we'll have some pointed questions that you can expand on that after the other presenters. Let's talk with then Dr. Chhibber, if you would.
Thank you, Chair Dr. Rockwell, and I also thank NICE Dr. Jespa especially for inviting me here to present my views on the topic. Fellow participants and fellow presenters, well, I'll be speaking on EU's Indo-Pacific strategy and India-EU multilateral engagements in the region. And since the time limit of 7 minutes, I'll be highlighting the main issues of my presentation. Basically, the paper argues that although European Union is not a conventional security player in the Indo-Pacific region, yet in view of the changing contours of geopolitics and emerging centrality of the Indo-Pacific region, it has approved EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And it is a major player, or it is rising towards a major player in the Indo-Pacific region. And also in that context, since there are many interest convergences between India and European Union in the Indo-Pacific strategy in the Indo-Pacific region, so both India and European Union can further collaborate in the region. Keeping this central notion in mind, I'll quickly highlight in brief about European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy and how there are divergences and convergences with India's role in Indo-Pacific, especially in the context of Quad. Well, when we talk about European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy, I would just quickly highlight that Indo-Pacific region has come to the, I would say, spanning from east coast of Africa to the Pacific Islands state, comprising of about 38 countries and 60% of the global GDP and 64% of world population, which is expected to rise further in the near future. It has become the center of world's gravity, the world's attention. And for India, Indo-Pacific region, it serves as an opportunity to strengthen its footprint in the region. Well, if we talk about the geographical node, then both India and European Union, we share similar views. In terms of India, our Indo-Pacific strategy, we could say, was highlighted long time back in our Sarkar doctrine, which was about security and growth for all in the region. And Indian approach is based on pillars of maritime security and ecology, disaster risk management, connectivity, supply chains, scientific and academic cooperation. Some of these areas are absolutely in tune with the European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy. And also, we lay a lot of emphasis on how to address the existing challenges, especially in terms of China's posture. So India has been collaborating of late with Quad countries, including US, Japan, and Australia, and also Quad Plus, with, which includes Vietnam, and also ASEAN. And EU is the latest partner in terms of being a stakeholder in the Indo-Pacific region. And when we talk about European Union, then of course, as a global trade power linked to the global supply chains, EU has crucial stakes in safeguarding the sea lanes of communication and freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific region, and also tackling the global challenges of climate change, cybersecurity, terrorism in the Indo-Pacific region again. So free and open Indo-Pacific region, which is inclusive and based on international law, is very crucial for the European Union also. And I recall that although there is a major divergence between India and Indian approach and the European Union, because European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy, it's more inclusive in terms of involving China. It's not a kind of a containment strategy as such. So even the other countries have not vocally spoken out about being a containment strategy, but EU is more inclusive in terms of engaging China, although of course it does have its own share of differences, whether in terms of trade or whether in terms of Xinjiang province, or whether in terms of COVID issues. So this is one I would say one challenge or one difference of opinion between India and the European strategy in terms of Indo-Pacific. However, I would say that the future partnerships will be driven by two important issues. One is the connectivity, and center is the supply chains. When we talk about the European strategy, as has been recently, which has the common strategy, which has come to light very recently, although the individual members like Germany, France, and the Netherlands have already articulated their strategy. When we look at this strategy, then it does talk about differences, talks about competition, also talks about how technological, political, and security areas need to be safeguarded. And here we can talk about how there has been challenges of what is called Wolf warrior diplomacy of China, which has not gone very well with the European Union. So European Union is basically trying to maintain a more balanced approach in terms of India and China and the region. Yet within this broad framework, since there are security agendas in terms of cyber activities, disinformation, emerging technology, terrorism, organized crime, disaster prevention, piracy, trafficking. So these are some areas which some of them may come in low politics, but definitely can have reflection on high politics also. And here, India and European Union can further work as partners in spite of our earlier differences on the trade front. Maritime security is another area where transnational security and the maritime security can intertwine. Here, I would talk about the recent naval exercises, the joint naval exercises in terms of trafficking, in terms of dealing with the piracy, which have taken place between India and the European Union off the coast of Somalia. So that does highlight that in spite of certain differences, the two can collaborate further. Also ASEAN, I do understand that European Union also gives equal importance to ASEAN or ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific strategy, which is something again entwined with India's open, inclusive, free trade policy in the free and open trade policy in the Indo-Pacific, centrality of ASEAN, which we have also recognized. So I would say that, India's policy nowadays is more about also connectivity. Here also, India and European Union can further collaborate. And the latest issue of the pandemic has also highlighted that how it's very important to diversify supply chains and also health security, how crucial it is. This is another area, India being called the pharmacy of the world, where European Union and India can further collaborate. So I would say that in spite of certain differences in approach, in spite of certain lacunas earlier, not tapping the full trade potential, Indo-Pacific region has given both India and European Union and the broader framework of Asia and Europe to come together and work on these areas and mitigate the challenges that we face together. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Chhibber. And we'll turn now to Dr. Peter Harris, who will talk to us about U.S. policy.
Good morning, Ernest, and good afternoon to colleagues in Asia. I'll try and also share my screen here. Thank you for inviting me to participate in the conference. I don't often get the opportunity to speak with international audiences during the pandemic, so this is a great privilege for me. I've been asked to speak on US foreign policy and the Indo-Pacific, and I'll keep my comments brief and just make a few points that I hope will stimulate some discussion. So the background here is that the Indo-Pacific idea or construct is a new one. I mean, 20 years ago, ecologists and marine scientists might have talked about the Indo-Pacific, but political scientists and international relations scholars mostly did not. It's in the mid 2000s, or over the past 15 years, the idea of an Indo-Pacific mega region has taken hold. So the idea of the confluence of the seas, as Shinzo Abe put it, has been accepted and internalized by some states in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, but not others. I think this is a contested region. The geographic scope, the political purpose, and the relevance of the Indo-Pacific mega region are still up for debate in international politics. The United States didn't create the idea of an Indo-Pacific, but it has a strong interest in having that idea take hold for states of the Indian Ocean and states of the Western Pacific to view themselves as belonging to a common regional home with common interests, and especially security interests, is very much in the US national interest. Why is that? Well, I think the reason is the United States would like to see a vast group of states from the Middle East through South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Western Pacific view themselves as having common interests with the United States alongside them, sharing in those interests, especially in the shadow of China's rise. It makes sense for the United States to want to unite so many countries of Asia in a common regional home defined by opposition to China's rise. I don't think the opposition to China's rise is the only feature of the Indo-Pacific. It's not the only criteria for membership that you view yourself as living in China's rise with an interest in balancing against China. But it helps. I think the United States certainly views the Indo-Pacific as a rhetorical tool, an instrument to bind together states in kind of a common front against China. I'll talk on the next slide that raises some problems for the United States and some challenges. The other interest, the core interest that the US has in the Indo-Pacific idea, is that the United States is not a natural power in the Indian Ocean. Just geographically, the United States is remote from the Indian Ocean. It has it has a base on Diego Garcia in the middle of the Indian Ocean, but it doesn't have any sovereign territory of its own in the Indian Ocean. It is a resident power in the Pacific Ocean, of course. So to unite the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Oceans in one mega region, the Indo-Pacific, by extension, makes the United States a resident power in both. And that suits the United States as people discuss relative decline vis-a-vis China. The United States is able to push back against that by claiming to be a resident power across the whole Indo-Pacific. So I think the US has got an interest in this idea taking hold, and for more states of the supposed region to say, yes, in fact, this region exists, this region is meaningful, and it organizes our foreign policy in a way consonant with US interests. But I'll use the last 3 minutes to talk about 3 challenges for US foreign policy. One is the geographic scope of this mega region. Who's in and who's out? Who gets included and who gets excluded? Depending on how the region is defined and how big it becomes, it can make it more difficult for the United States to balance the interests of its allies and partners. If the Persian Gulf, for example, is made part of the Indo-Pacific, and it is geographically a sea of the Indian Ocean, it's not clear that the members of the Quad, for example, will see eye to eye on regional security issues in the Persian Gulf. So the United States might actually have an interest in defining the Indo-Pacific smaller rather than more expansive. The second challenge for the United States is the political purpose of the Indo-Pacific. I think a lot of people in Washington, D.C. would like the Indo-Pacific construct to be a way to contain China, as Dr. Chhibber just said. But some small powers in the Indo-Pacific, especially ASEAN, and Dr. Chhibber noted the external powers like the EU, do not want an anti-China grouping. They want an inclusive Indo-Pacific, will leave open the door for China being folded into this regional common home. If that's the case, then the political purpose of the Indo-Pacific might become less attractive to the US. Again, it's hard to balance those interests with US allies and partners. The final challenge, I think, for the United States is the content of the rules. We hear a lot about a rules-based order for the Indo-Pacific. But what rules? Is this just a reassertion of old rules like sovereignty, non-intervention, territorial integrity? Those are relatively uncontroversial rules that no government opposes, at least rhetorically. So is that what the Indo-Pacific is? It's just a reassertion of old Westphalian rules with a special emphasis on maritime security? Because if that's true, it might lose some of its normative appeal inside the US, where members of civil society and the political class would like to see human rights, universal human rights, the promotion of democracy, those kind of rules made part of international order. And those rules do not seem to be part of the Indo-Pacific rules-based order. And I think that poses a challenge for the United States. So I think I'm at 7 minutes, so I will end there, and I look forward to discussing more with colleagues.
Thank you, Peter. And now we'll turn to Professor Sarkar. You're still muted, ma'am.
Extremely sorry, I didn't get. Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Pramod Jashwal and his team for conducting this 3-day international conventions and also providing opportunity to speak at this platform. My topic is the emerging maritime security environment in the Indo-Pacific region, the role of India as a net security provider. We know that maritime security and Indo-Pacific are the two latest buzzwords and have been simultaneously gaining currency in international relations today. And there is a common thing between these two terms is that the two terms has not arrived any concrete meaning. However, if we see maritime security in general, it has been understood that maritime security is basically a freedom from threat from or at sea, whereas Indo-Pacific is a regional construct that so far has been gained as a regional construct and has been defined by different countries according to the interest and power relations among the countries involved. So far, the competitive and the convergent of security interest of the central actors of the Indo-Pacific, that are USA, Australia, India, and Japan, that make up the Indo-Pacific region as active regional construct. India acknowledges Indo-Pacific as the mutual region that constitutes from the shores of Africa to that of Americans, and the region provides the 21st century a vast array of global opportunities as well as challenges. Consider attentions in the recent United Nations Security Council high-level open debate titled Enhancing Maritime Security, a Case for International Cooperation, that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi hosted on 9th August 2021. This debate took place at the backdrop of intensifying conflicts in Afghanistan and Myanmar, as well as at a time when the world is preparing for the COVID-19. In this statement, in this debate, Modi made a call for a holistic approach to maritime security and has underlined the boosting for international and national cooperation to deal with such challenges on the seas. Besides, Modi in his statement also asserted India's role as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. So it is against this background, I'd like to highlight, emphasize my importance on the Indo-Pacific region and emerging challenges that the region is passing through, and what is the role of India as a net security provider. I won't say much about the significance of Indo-Pacific maritime regions, as I heard Dr. Bharti has already told about this. I'll just be very brief in that in the 21st century, Indo-Pacific, that spans from the Western Pacific or Western Pacific Ocean to the Western Indian Oceans, along the eastern coast of Africa, has emerged a significant geostrategic region for trade, investment, energy, cooperation, and competition. And these roles have been previously played by the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans in the 20th century. However, approximately through this region, 95% of the India's trade by volume and 70% of its value pass through these regions. Also, through the Indian Oceans region passes around 1 lakh ships every year. So that makes the difference. As well, also the region is also very much rich in natural resources, and this provides the basis for US-China trade or power struggle in the region. With this growing significance of the Indo-Pacific region, the region has been faced with several non-traditional security challenges, and the nature of these threats in the regions varies from region to region. As in the case of Indian Oceans, there is threats from China's assertiveness in the Indian Ocean region through the string of pearls strategy. Besides, there are other threats to the regions like maritime terrorism, piracy and armed robbery, illicit drug trafficking, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, as well as natural disasters. Although maritime terrorism after 2011 has not been, Mumbai attack has not been seen, but the piracy and armed attack has also been reduced to this region, especially with certain exceptions like 1 or 2 attacks in the recent, in the Arabian Sea of Onam, whereby killing 2 members. And the maritime trades in the Western Pacific has been mostly concerned about Chinese assertiveness in the South China Sea, East China Sea, as well as in recently China's assertive in the Taiwan Islands. And this has been a major concern for the global community. There has been also land reclamation as well as building artificial islands by China, as well as militarization of island also taking place as in when the world is going through the COVID pandemic, COVID-19. And also here during the COVID-19, while the countries of the world are preparing to come out from this pandemic, China's took this advantage as well as also taking several uncounted plans at the sea, especially in the waters of Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines. So with this, Chinese activities in the Indo-Pacific regions, as well as several emerging challenges in the regions, has responded and countered from Quad countries, non-Quad countries, as well as from the ASEAN states. Quad countries, Japan, Australia, India, and USA, as well as non-Quad countries like Germany, UK, and France, has been openly advocating free and open Indo-Pacific regions and rule-based order, democracy, and resilience. Even ASEAN has also been countering China's assertiveness in the South China Sea. And in the 36th ASEAN Summit that held in June 2020, where Vietnam was chaired, was able to use the words serious incidents of the Chinese assertiveness in the South China Sea, where it was previously used as serious as land accumulations, as well as Vietnam has been supported by Indonesia and Philippines of Chinese actions in the regions. Besides this, the region has also seen increase in military spending in 2020, as there has been a report from CIPRI Military Expenditure FactSet 2021 found that the US defense spending to this region in the world has been increased by 3.7% of its GDP, whereas China's increased by 1.7%, India 2.9%, Russia 4.3%, UK 2.2% of its GDP. Japan's military expenditure for the year 2020 was 1%, and even the current government signaled to bolster its defense spending beyond its long-standing cap of 1% GDP. Therefore, it shows that how far China's assertiveness has had an impact on Japan. Even Australia has also increased its GDP by 2.1%, and over the next 10 years, the Australian government will bolster its defense spending and allocate Australian $575 billion to develop a robust capabilities of its own. Even the military spending of the Southeast Asian countries has been increased by 5.2% from the previous year. Besides this, there has been a growing weakest consensus building between USA and South Korea in this region, as well as US, South Korea, Japan trilateral agreement. Besides, there has also been Malaysia, countries like Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand has been, in confused situations whether to take part with China or Japan, China or USA. Besides this, the region has been seen as new kinds of cooperative initiative against the China's assertiveness and its building Maritime Silk Road or Chinese string of pearls strategy in the regions through Blue Dot Network, AREA, Build Act, Asia Edges, Indo-Pacific Business Forums, US aid, as well as Japan's quality infrastructure projects, Australian New Colombo Plan, India-Japan, Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. So this can be seen that has been various kinds of response has been seen in the recent years. And here comes India as a role of a net security provider. In this role as a net security provider has been another buzz in the Indo-Pacific regions and has been growing louder at home as well as abroad. Many countries in the Indo-Pacific see India as a regional net security provider, including the present US President Joe Biden, that calls India as one of the most important partner in the Indo-Pacific and welcomes India's emerging role as a leading global power and its role as a net security provider in the Indo-Pacific region. India has been so far improving its credential to prove the world that it can be a net security provider. And this has been made vocal in the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018, where India's vision of Indo-Pacific has been stated. Besides, Modi has also played a holistic and dynamic role as a net security provider in Indo-Pacific regions, such as after coming to power in 2014, Modi restrained Lookist policy into Actist policy and enhanced maritime relations with Southeast Asia, West Asia, Africa, and strengthened ties with Pacific Island countries and Indian Ocean littorals. Then in 2015, Indian Maritime Security Strategy on ensuring secure seas focused on naval power to control the sea lanes of communications and choke points across the Indian Ocean. Besides, there has been a concept like Sarkar that Modi initiated in 2015, and in 2018, Indian Navy established Information Fusion Center in the Ocean region to effectively keep track of the shipping traffic as well as the other critical development in the region. Then in 2021, the Indian government is set to appoint National Maritime Security Coordinator to interface between the civilian and military domain with the objectives of enhancing India's security architectures and energy security. Besides this, India is also conducting several dialogues, like 2+2 dialogues with foreign and defense ministers with Japan, Australia, and USA. Recently, New Delhi and Canberra upgraded their 2+2 dialogue from secretaries level to that of the ministerial level. Besides, India is also conducting several joint military and naval exercises with the countries in the Indo-Pacific regions, as well as with ASEAN, and with USA. India conducts more bilateral military exercises than any other country. To help them in capacity building assistance with helicopters, land crafting, vessel survey in India, as well as also India is currently implementing 100 million defense line of credit for 12 high-speed boats for Vietnam that will be used to enhance coastal security and prevent illegal activities.
Ma'am, you need to wrap up, please.
India is also India is also hugely investing in acquiring military weapons from USA, Australia, Japan, as well as Singapore, etc. Therefore, I would like to conclude by saying that the Indo-Pacific construct presents significant economic opportunities as well as challenges to these regions. And the most aggressive challenge has been from China's assertiveness in the South China Sea, East China Sea, as well as in the Indian Oceans. So it can be said that India's security role in the Indo-Pacific region is dynamic and holistic approach, but India needs to invest more on Indian Navy, that which is only 15% of the GDP present when compared to other Quad countries is very low. So that has been also a mismatch between its ambition and spending. So that also need to be looked into. And finally, that India has so much of policy on maritime security. So it's high time for India to walk the talk and fulfill its vision for safe, free, and open Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We're going to shift gears and take a look at the Pacific Islands with Mr. Guerin. Mr. Guerin, it's your floor.
Thank you. Warm welcome, respected speakers, organizers, and participants of the conference. I'm pleased to take part in this wonderful session, as well as let me congratulate you on another successful event. Today, I'd like to consider the South Pacific as a component of Indo-Pacific, and the leading sub-regional power, Australia, actively supports Indo-Pacific and was one of the first to add this concept in official documents, including because of its resistance to ambitious China. At the same time, the fact that the Indian and the Pacific Oceans are connected into dual space make Pacific Island countries, or PICs, more attractive for Australia's partners such as Japan, India, and the United States. However, when analyzing the geostrategic of the South Pacific, it's necessary to consider the PIC's perceptions of the emerging competition between the larger actors. As for me, the attention to smaller states would be the success for one of the competing parties, it's Quad or China, in building the new sub-regional order. Indo-Pacific is a unified platform for building a unified strategy, but it's also a challenge. Of course, PICs may be concerned about the expanding power of China, but they are not ready to protect other countries' national interests to the detriment of their own, or to join the group potentially confronting China. Nevertheless, we'll be realistic because the order is still determined by major powers. So today we'll define prospects and challenges considering the relations of the great middle powers with the smaller ones. In recent years, Australia has made a significant progress in security building. Of course, it has affected the Pacific Island countries. In 2018, in the Board Declaration, the PICs recognize a more dynamic geopolitical environment. Thus, national security will play an increasingly important role in the sub-region. Of course, first of all, we should expect more military exercises of the Quad countries or security agreements with the PICs. However, the armed conflict in the South Pacific is very difficult to imagine. At the time when the PIC's economy is suffering from a pandemic, the probability of their acting against the main trading and investment power partner, China, is extremely small. So we reach the economic challenges in the South Pacific. Today, the struggle to maintain domestic economic stability is the main concern for PIC's leader, and the island states can ease the economic issue by trade recovery, including with the supply chains resilience initiatives. Because of their large number, PICs are an attractive partner of the new initiatives. However, PICs continue to use the traditional method, loans. Moreover, this thesis that China's loans are potential threat to small island states is spreading faster and faster among the experts. But the issue of debt traps is controversial, since debt is a problem of the entire region. For example, among the countries with a high debt risk, we can find supporters of Taiwan who have debt but don't have access to the People's Republic of China financing. And I expect that the issue of debt management will take an important place in the policy of PICs, but attention to the conditions for further loans will also increase. Another pressing problem for PICs is the climate change. This issue worries them even more than issues of defense. And as for me, due to the commitment of the current Australian government of Scott Morrison to the US foreign policy, Australia has no choice and will pay more and more attention to the green agenda. Humanitarian aid may also take a stronger position in the sub-region. Otherwise, China will take a leading role in this issue too. At the same time, the expression of national mood is becoming a more frequent phenomenon. Referendums in New Caledonia, attempts to gain independence in Bougainville may be a winning situation for some major powers and a losing one for others. Fragmentation is also a pressing issue for the Pacific Islands Forum. As you know, the countries of Micronesia have decided to leave the organization, but with the growing influence of China in the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, the United States will increasingly manifest themselves and Indo-Pacific in the main sub-regional organization. In general, with the Indo-Pacific and the competition between China and Quad, the South Pacific is gaining more geostrategic importance. Australia will continue to resist China's growing presence, not only by increasing defense funding or aid, but also by attracting other Quad and potential Quad plus actors. China is not going, as for me, to seize the Pacific Island countries, but from year to year, it strengthens ties with the small states, as if surrounding Australia with more and more loyal actors. This is a logical strategy that everyone uses. And of course, confrontation of larger powers will help small island states to diversify their ties, but it forces them to adapt to new and more complicated geostrategic realities. Thank you, and I will be pleased to answer all your questions.
Thank you, sir. Finally, we'll turn to Dr. Aparajita for a discussion on Bangladesh, the Quad, and the Indo-Pacific.
Okay. Thank you, sir. A very good afternoon. Thank you, Chair and the NICE, for giving me an opportunity to share my ideas on the topic Bangladesh, Quad, and China's insecurity. The topic has been in discussion in areas of international politics in general and Indo-Pacific in particular since few months, and the credit goes to Chinese ambassador to Bangladesh, who threatened Bangladesh not to join Quad by giving the statement that Bangladesh's decision to join Quad would damage the bilateral relations between the two, and the similar hints were given during Chinese Defense Ministry's visit to Bangladesh in April this year. So according to her viewpoint, this displays the wolf warrior diplomacy of China. Now, it is important to have a brief idea about Quad, what it is all about. So Quad was formed in 2007 by among four countries, that is USA, Japan, India, and Australia. It is a type of intergovernmental security forum. The four Quad leaders have vowed to strive for an Indo-Pacific region that is free, open, inclusive, healthy, anchored by democratic values, and unconstrained by coercion, sending a clear message to China against its aggression action in the region. The officials from the Quad nations met virtually in March 2021 to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic, and this time they were joined by other countries like South Korea, Vietnam, and New Zealand. This event sparked discussion over the possibility of Quad Plus. China fears that the US and India may jointly put pressure on Bangladesh to join the expanded grouping. Due to its strategically important geographic location and proximity to the Bay of Bengal, Bangladesh's importance has increased significantly in the unfolding geostrategic and geopolitical equation in the Indo-Pacific. China considers Quad as anti-China club and a narrow-purpose geopolitical clique, and asks Bangladesh to jointly work in bringing about peace and prosperity in the region. Chinese Defense Minister called for joint efforts against power outside the region, setting up military alliance in South Asia. So indirectly, it can be said that he was pointing at the Quad groupings. Now, the question arises, what was the need of such a statement of threatening Bangladesh not to join grouping, because Bangladesh has never hinted upon joining the grouping, nor been invited by any of the 4 members as claimed by the officials of Bangladesh. So different scholars, they have given different views regarding such statement by China. Former ambassador of India, Tripathi, said China is worried that many more countries might join the group, and that's the reason it is trying to arm twist smaller countries like Bangladesh by warning them. China fears the fact that when more countries start joining the Quad, then probably it will be encircled by many countries. According to Harsvi Pant, with his message to Dhaka, Beijing was laying down a marker that nations should desist from engaging with the Quad. According to Rajiv Bhatia, China is just testing the waters. It wants to assess where Bangladesh stands in India-China relations, knowing well New Delhi's close ties with Dhaka. China sees Bangladesh as an important strategic partner in its Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese companies are involved in various development projects. If Bangladesh joins the Quad Plus, it will be a big blow to China's efforts to bring South Asia under its geopolitical orbit. The Chinese ambassador's comment can be viewed as Beijing's well-thought-out move to prevent any future possibilities of Bangladesh joining the alliance. Meanwhile, the Chinese ambassador's warning came at a time when Dhaka was making desperate attempts to import the COVID-19 vaccine, including from China, after Indian government banned export of vaccine because of surge of coronavirus infection in India. So Bangladesh received in May 2021 500,000 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine from China. Felt it was the right time to warn Bangladesh against the Quad amid growing pressure on the government to continue the vaccination campaign and Dhaka's subsequent reliance on Beijing to get vaccine. Bangladesh, being an independent and sovereign country. So if a country is a sovereign country, it is free to take its decision both internally as well as externally. So Bangladesh, it is an independent country, it is a sovereign country, and it has responded well to such claim by China. The statement was considered unfortunate and aggressive by the foreign minister of Bangladesh. Bangladesh has made it clear that Dhaka pursues independent foreign policy, and it is independent and sovereign countries and free to take its decision, which USA also opened about Bangladesh. It follows non-aligned and balanced foreign policy and would decide its policies based on these principles. Dhaka has only shown interest so far in being a part of the Indo-Pacific initiative because of its location in the Bay of Bengal, but even then it is interested only in the economic and connectivity aspect of it. Bangladesh has been maintaining a balancing act between global powers. Dhaka is deeply aware that it needs to maintain good relationship with powerful nations such as the USA, China, India, Japan to ensure its continued development both economically and infrastructurally. Bangladesh is all set to graduate into a developing nation, as we all know, from a least developed country in 2026. Although it is a matter of celebration for the country, policymakers know that graduation will entail significant economic challenges. Bangladesh will lose the trade benefits that it enjoys as a least developed country. The government, therefore, will try to make the best use of the next 5 years so that the transition takes place with momentum and it is sustainable. To conclude, I would like to say that Bangladesh is properly balancing the things, and it should balance among different powers in the region, and it is likely to follow its neutral foreign policy and avoid choosing one country over the other, which is the best for its national interest. And in the foreign policy, national interest plays an important role while deciding any policies. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Parajita. So we obviously have a wide array of different topics that were presented by all of our panelists, and we do have a few questions that have popped up already in the chat box. I'll go ahead and turn to those first so that our audience gets a little bit greater participation here. So the first one is posed to us by Tikraj Koirala, who wants to know, he says, Nepal as a landlocked country sandwiched between China and India, is there any significance of Nepal's role in Indo-Pacific cooperation? What kind of role can it play by, or can be played by small countries like Nepal in Indo-Pacific cooperation? So I'll just toss that out. Who would like to answer that one?
Well, can I take that?
Please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think it's a very interesting question. I would say that the benefits of working together in terms of connectivity of Asia and Europe exist for all the countries as part of the Sagar initiative also. As far as the Nepal in particular is concerned, then definitely cooperation or benefit in terms of disaster risk reduction or reconstruction, food security, healthcare, all these exist for Nepal also. But if you remember, then during the earlier American administration, after a visit between Nepal and America, when the Trump administration mentioned that Nepal will be an important partner in the Indo-Pacific strategy, then under the pressure from the Chinese ambassador, a statement came from Nepal that it will not exactly be a part of the Indo-Pacific strategy because it wants to be a non-aligned country in terms of its relations with a very powerful neighbor. Because China is not only an important neighbor in terms of BRI, but very heavy investments are also there. So I think it's for Nepal how it wants to work it out, because it's very important, China being a very powerful neighbor, also with a lot of investments. That is one scenario. It does not want to offend China. And the second scenario could be a more balancing act where it can also take the benefit of Indo-Pacific strategy without being part of an alliance. As India always says, that it never wants to be part of a military alliance as such. It's more about a cooperation for different issue areas rather, as I said, in terms of food security or enhanced reconstruction, healthcare, connectivity. Thank you.
Dr. Aparajita, would you like to address this too? It's kind of related to the Bangladesh situation. There's a little bit of similarity there, I think.
Yes, sir. The thing is, any country, whenever it whenever it makes policies or foreign policy, then it has to first see to its national interest. It's not like that it has to choose between two or the three or four. It should balance between them, which they are doing. And the thing is, the global powers that are important for them, they should they should give some certain incentives so that they can get attracted to the other country. So the foreign policy, the national interest, there should be a balance of power for the smaller countries. That is my view, sir.
Thank you, man. Anyone else want to make any points?
Can I make a quick point?
Sure.
I thought the point about Nepal making a statement that it would not be part of the Indo-Pacific strategy because it wants to be a non-aligned country, as Dr. Chhibber said, is kind of highlights for the United States and other Quad members exactly the problem. I mean, if regional powers explicitly view the Indo-Pacific construct and Indo-Pacific terminology as an anti-China thing, kind of by and of itself, by definition, it's a problem because some states won't buy into that construct, and it will push powers like India and ASEAN to reassure them that no, this is not an anti-China construct. This can be an inclusive, regional-led idea that is not anti-China. And if that happens, then it loses some of its value to the United States, which probably does want this to be an anti-China grouping. So at some point, there's a debate between, is this an inclusive idea? Is this an exclusive idea? How can we balance everybody's interests? But at some point, states, they take a stance on, well, how do we see this construct emerging? And in the shadow of China's rise, I think some states are simply not on the same page as the US and the Quad, and that it gets highlighted time and time again, and that's a challenge that I think the United States will continue to face.
Thank you. All right, we've got another couple questions. First one is for Mr. Garin. Nikolai Goriachev asks, Mr. Garin, in your opinion, what impact will the Macron's recent visit to Polynesia have on the relations of small island states in Oceania with Asian countries, especially China?
Thank you for your question. And I think it's more important in the fact that in 2019, France became the first country of the European Union who adopted the Indo-Pacific Strategy. And for me, it's symbolic, in fact, that's expanding that President Macron has announced it in the South Pacific. And of course, France tried to expand the scope of its foreign policy and try to improve its status in the global power. The answer on the question of Nikolai lies in the updated France Indo-Pacific Strategy of 2021. And France's positioning as where the France positioning themselves as the intermediary power between the Europe and Asia, and allows it to occupy a middle position in a dynamic region. On the one hand, it participates with the Quad countries in maintaining the balance of power in the relations with China. On the other hand, it rarely directly opposes to PRC. With the involvement of the EU to Indo-Pacific agenda, France's direct rhetoric against the PRC may become even more softer. At a time when a contiguous space of the Indian and the Pacific Ocean is becoming a new strategic center of gravity, France needs also to enlist the support of main actors in the region. Paris choose, of course, Australia, India, Japan, and ASEAN, which also have a varying degrees of the China relations with China, and of course share some concerns about the growing influence of Beijing. And the adoption of the updated Indo-Pacific strategy of France demonstrates its commitment to a vision of its partners in the Indo-Pacific. In the South Pacific, France also has some challenges. For example, the third referendum on French New Caledonia will be held soon. During the October 2020 independence referendum, more than half of the voters, of course, also support the idea of remaining part of France. But at the same time, supporters of independence gains 3% more than in previous referendum. This indicates that the growing polarization in the society of the New Caledonia and the growing number of supporters of independence. And of course, moreover, the turnout in 2020, it was 86%. It's still a maximum for the time of holding referendums there. And of course, and given the fact that France actively supports Indo-Pacific, the loss of New Caledonia may weaken the position of the European power in Oceania, as well as call into question its future role in the Indo-Pacific region, where the rivalry of the major powers is unfolding. But in the meantime, all the island possessions of France in the Indo-Pacific are characterized by a fairly high level of economic, food, energy dependence on France. In order to maintain its presence in the region, France may try to adjust the legal status of the territories in Oceania towards the greater control from Paris, as was the case of Mayotte in Indian Ocean in 2009. And of course, in this case, in Oceania, there is also a need to mark a longer process in the Bougainville, which will be resolved between the Prime Minister James Marape, the President Ismail Touroama, and the Parliament of Papua New Guinea in Port Moresby. But now we should, as for me, express our hope for the continuation of an objective and a peaceful dialogue between the parties, who have already shown the whole world an effective model for resolving such contradiction. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Dr. Nusrat Nazneen. And it's directed towards Dr. Aparajita, but I would open it up to Dr. Sarkar as well. Do you think that the withdrawal of US from Afghanistan is going to impact Quad 2.0 in some serious ways? And I would add I'm going to merge this with one of my questions. How does the fall of Afghanistan impact India's efforts in, say, Chabahar, which obviously had a strong Afghani piece to that equation? And if you could kind of address both of those questions, I'll turn it over to you, ladies. Again, that's for Dr. Aparajita and Dr. Sarkar.
Sir, can you please repeat the question?
Sure. So the first part of it is, do you think that the withdrawal of the US from Afghanistan is going to impact Quad 2.0 in some serious way? And then the second part is based on Chabahar, is that perhaps one of the places where the pullout from Afghanistan is going to have a negative impact on India specifically, and perhaps the ability of the Quad 2.0 to project into the Indian Ocean in itself?
Yes, definitely it will have an impact, because the situation at one part of the country, and when it is your neighbor, then it impacts the other countries as well. So the situation which is going on in Afghanistan and USA withdrawal, it will surely have impact on the Quad also, because there the other countries are also now the other groups are also becoming important. So this will have an impact. So this is what I have to say.
Professor Sarkar? Okay, perhaps we've lost her, and we'll come back to her if we have time. The next question is to Dr. Goriacheva, and this comes to us from, sorry, my eyesight's getting really bad, Neetu Bandari, who would like to know, what is the core reason behind the Russia-Japan friendship despite the Kuril Islands dispute? And is this friendship directed toward energy, oil, diplomacy?
Thank you so much for a very interesting question. I would like to call Russo-Japanese relations as a friendship, but it's a pity I can't, because lack of peace treaty between two countries still it means a lot. So even few geostrategic geopolitical experts think that lack of peace treaty means that two countries are still in the state of war. Of course, it's no war, but it's very far from friendship. And from the economic point of view, both Russia and Japan share very few percent, 2 to 3% for each other's economic volume trade. And that's, far from the ideal situation. The best relations we have in the cultural sphere, where Japanese is famous for its soft power in Russia and very good perception of Japanese among youngsters. And for Russia, with its rich cultural activities like ballet and other things, so they are very popular in Japan. That is on the contrast with the political impression of Russia. Let me say more than 70% of the Japanese people, they have negative perception of Russia due to the history, memory, and so on and so forth. So, but right, you are speaking about energy or oil diplomacy, because some politicians and experts think that Kuril Islands disputes are the maybe only a point for future communication or interaction of Russia and Japan, so they have very few points to speak of. Still, Russia is turned to the Europe, despite of the Eastern pivot that was declared by President Putin. So still, we have some kind of complementary relationship. When Japan, after the 2011, after Fukushima nuclear disaster, needs Russian oil, and Russia needs Japan technologies and maybe investments. But here, Japan is not the only option for Russia, since China has grown up. So China is the rival for Japan, both claiming for Russian oil, crude oil and gas, and Japan has to, struggle with China on that. So I hope that we will come to some kind of, balanced relationship, but they are still very far from the friendship. Thank you so much for the interest in for my presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question now. Dr. Harris, aside from not being a resident power in the Indian Ocean, why has the U.S. failed to fully embrace the Indian Ocean side of the Indo-Pacific construct? I mean, we've changed the name of the combatant command there from Pacific Command to Indo-PACOM or Indo-Pacific Command, but it doesn't seem like in policy streams or even defense issues that we've fully adopted then that Indo-Pacific mindset.
That's a great question, and one that you probably know the answer to a lot better than I do, but I'll give it my best shot. I mean, I think part of the reason is that it illustrates another problem of the Indo-Pacific concept, which, I mean, as you say, from the US perspective, the Indian Ocean is not as strategically vital to the United States as the Western Pacific. It's certainly an important region, a world region. Everyone in the United States recognizes that economically, in terms of security policy, demographically, politically, the Indian Ocean region is immensely important to the United States, but still not as important as the Western Pacific. And I think it kind of highlights the problem that the United States didn't create this region. It was Japan and India articulating a common set of interests and interconnectedness, and it was a regional led construct that the United States is now trying to join and be a part of. So that's the first thing, is that the United States didn't really plan for this 15 years ago. It was a development that happened among Asian powers that the United States is trying to make suit its interests, and it can make it suit its interests, but it didn't really plan for this. The second bigger problem, though, I think, is the Indian Ocean doesn't figure too prominently in the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States because it's difficult to balance the interests of America's partners and allies in that region, or it's more difficult than it is in the Western Pacific. In the Western Pacific, it's pretty obvious what the goal is. It's to contain China, to prevent an invasion of Taiwan, to prevent domination of the South China Sea. All that stuff are things that states on China's periphery can agree on, right? From Japan through the Philippines and Australia and so forth. In the Indian Ocean, not so much, especially when we start to talk about the Persian Gulf. Let's say the United States is engaged in disputes with Iran in the Persian Gulf. Well, what does India think about that? Not necessarily the same as the United States. Would Japan and Australia be happy about being roped into kind of US disputes in the Persian Gulf region by virtue of membership of the Indo-Pacific? I don't think so, right? How does the United States balance its relationship with India and Pakistan, for example, in the Indian Ocean? So it's much more difficult for the United States to ensure like a homogeneous block of allies and partners in the Indian Ocean, especially the western portion of the Indian Ocean, than it is in the Pacific Ocean. And I think that's why we see more of a focus on the Pacific, is because it's an easier lift to unite countries with a common purpose, which is to kind of resist Chinese influence, than it is in the Indian Ocean, where states and regional actors have got very divergent interests that maybe cannot be bridged by the US.
Great. Well, we have a sort of a follow-on question from Nimesh Babu Oli, who asks, with the diminishing US credibility, especially after the current Afghanistan fiasco, how will the countries in the Indo-Pacific region see and deal with the United States in the days to come? And Peter, if you could take a stab at that first, and then we'll kind of open it up, because I do want to get everyone else's perspective, since we have a fairly interesting representation on the panel of folks from throughout the region.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I mean, so I think in the US, the way people are thinking about this is split into two camps. There are definitely those who fear the regional actors will view the United States as less credible now. You know, we capitulated, we threw allies under the bus, we kind of retreated. This is very bad for US credibility. But there's another camp, and I think I'm myself, I'm in this camp, that think the withdrawal from Afghanistan, while chaotic, the evacuations are chaotic and grim, to see the Taliban take control in Kabul, probably will not undermine US credibility across the region. I think most states in the region will recognize that continuing the war in Afghanistan into a third decade, a war that could not really be won, a war with very little political support in the United States, is different from a commitment to allies elsewhere in the Indo-Pacific. So I think US credibility will survive in the Indo-Pacific, even despite the withdrawal from Afghanistan. I actually think the bigger threat to US credibility was the Trump administration, and the unpredictability and the outright hostility towards US allies, the explicit consideration of pulling troops out of South Korea and making allies pay the United States for protection was probably a bigger threat to US credibility than ending the war in Afghanistan. I mean, I'd like to learn from others, though, who live in the region and who could tell me if that's right or wrong.
May I go next, Dr. Rockwell? Yeah. I see that as far as India-US relations, whether in Indo-Pacific or bilateral relations are concerned, India has concerns about the situation in Afghanistan. But given our relations with the US and in terms of the deeper relation that we are sharing in terms of naval exercises, military relations, and otherwise, I don't see bilateral relations or our relations within the Quad being affected by US withdrawal as such. But India as a country is definitely affected by what's happening in Afghanistan. One, of course, because we had huge investments in Afghanistan. I still remember in 2015, Prime Minister Modi actually went and inaugurated the parliament in Afghanistan. So our huge investments that we have to suffer, also our relations with Central Asia, Afghanistan being the connecting point. So I think that will be a major concern. Another major concern would be use of Afghanistan or the Talibanized territories by militants for anti-India activities. Though as of now, we actually don't know whether it would be that case. But yes, that is one of the concerns that we have.
Would anybody else like to address this? I'll take that as a no. Okay, I'll go to some of my questions then. Let's see. Dr. Goriacheva, how does Japan's membership in the Quad and friction with China impact relations with Russia and the negotiations on territorial issues addressed in your presentation?
Thank you for your question. You see, as I have mentioned before, still Russia has a very, let me say, contradictory foreign policy, which is mostly turned and aimed at relationship with the European countries. And thus the Quad initiative is very important for this region, I mean, Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific. In Russia, we have, in the academic field, very few works on it. And in the political stance, as we have more acute problems dealing with the USA and with the other Middle Eastern countries, like threat of terrorism. Still, the meaning of Quad or the perspectives of its involvement in the Russian policy, they aren't that so, expectations or thinking of it as a threat are not really high. So as we have Japan here and we have China as our strategic partner in very many fields, we still, by we, I mean Russia, we still don't have some kind of very clear policy toward it. So in future, of course, it may be some kind, every change of alliances, new alliances, they can be the threat to our position and to the position to the Kuril Islands, but still, I think it's my private opinion that we will have threat of bilateral some kind of weapon rush here, like Russia expanding its presence on the Kuril Islands with the military bases, which Japan sees as a threat, and expanding of these military bases on the territory of Japan and on the neighboring territories. That can be the threat on it. But I don't think that situation will change in the nearest future, because every side of this conflict, or not the conflict, but relations, understands that the use of power and try to break the world order will lead to maybe to the third world war, if you let me express it like this. So that's my point of view.
Thank you. So I would again ask folks that are watching to feel free to add some questions to the chat box. And I'd also encourage the panelists to start thinking of some questions that they would like to ask their peers as we move forward. My next question is for Mr. Guerin. You mentioned the Pacific Islands Forum, which held their 50th anniversary meeting earlier this month. And the fact that the forum has basically fractured, and we had a significant number of members leave back in February. How does this impact then their ability to interact with one another and to also present a united front then in dealing with the great power competition in their neck of the woods?
Thank you for your question. It's really important because the last of the meeting of the Pacific Island Forum was the 50th anniversary, and I want to state that the Pacific Island Forum always is the voice of the South Pacific. It's sometimes it's more greater voice on the United Nations and so on than Australia, for example, than New Zealand. But at the same time, we've seen at the address of the Joe Biden, we see that the United States has an Indo-Pacific strategy, but for example, the unclassified document of President Trump united the Southeast Asia and the Oceania in one region, one sub-region. And nowadays, this trend is continuing. For example, Joe Biden said about the Indo-Pacific, about climate change, about COVID-19, but he didn't say it about the regionalism. It's the key key issue for the Fiji, for Papua New Guinea, and so on. But of course, I think that when the United States will update its strategy in the South Pacific, they will, of course, say the Pacific Island Forum is one of the main areas of cooperation with the Pacific Island states. And of course, Micronesian countries, who I think that they will return to the organization. And if you'll see that they are compared to the countries of Melanesia, for example, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, the Micronesian countries have a greater degree of dependence of the main partner, Washington. And of course, if Washington wants to gain the more power in the sub-region, of course, it will grow. It will try to return for the Micronesian countries in this organization.
Thank you. My next question is for Dr. Chhibber. You talk about EU strategy, for the Indo-Pacific. But of course, certain member states, Germany, the Netherlands, and others have presented their own strategies for the Indo-Pacific. So my question is there really an EU strategy, or is it a bunch of different European Union member states strategies that are going to be tried to fuse together perhaps? Or should we be talking about these individual states more than the EU itself, given that the EU hasn't always been the most effective organization in dealing with anything, particularly in a unified manner, and is dealing with some of its own internal problems, with the Brexit and possible other members expressing interest in perhaps following suit.
Well, Dr. Rockwell, I completely agree with you. I think in spite of European Union being considered as one of a very successful supranational organization in terms of integration, one thing that they lack is a common foreign and security policy, which we have seen in diverse issues, whether it's Kosovo, a long time back to present crisis, So I think with the countries having divergent views like Germany and others, definitely it's one of the biggest challenges of European Union in present times to actually take that EU strategy, a common EU strategy in terms of Indo-Pacific forward. Because even if you look at the present strategy or the outlook which has come out or consultation, it talks mainly about non-military issues or non-military cooperation or the so-called low politics. It doesn't go into the domain of the high politics, because that's where the divergence are actually mainly that we have seen over the decades. So this is something they have to work on, and I think it's the biggest challenge. They have not been able to come up. The reasons can be different. It can be historical, it can be other present issues of not being forged itself as a military alliance or a military outlook, a common military outlook, and their views of always trying to deal with issues in non-military way. Even when we talk about this outlook, it does talk about climate change, it talks about even naval cooperation in some ways, it does talk about some divergence, but it does not name any country as such, whether it's China. And again, the same thing is there. They are balancing India, China, and other countries. They have a comprehensive agreement with China, and in spite of some challenges they have with China, although it has not been ratified as yet, but in spite of other challenges, they have not come and spoken, okay, this is kind of an anti-China alliance or something. They are trying to have it more inclusive in terms of balancing India and China and other powers. So definitely a common strategic foreign military outlook, which is required in Indo-Pacific, is something that looks like a distant future. So they may cooperate in other
You're breaking up on us a little bit there.
Or green development. One security aspect is am I audible, Dr. Rockwell?
Yeah, you're back on now. You're kind of choppy there for the last minute or so.
Yeah. I was just saying that I was just talking about how they may work together on certain areas which are of critical importance in terms of maritime piracy or in terms of cyber security or even in terms of connectivity, joint naval exercises, but definitely having a common security or military cooperation or a foreign policy approach due to historical and other reasons. And also divergent views among the members themselves, including Germany. So that is a very distant approach or a very distant kind of a dream that at present, we cannot think that is going to happen. But yes, definitely there are other areas in which we can see so-called low politics areas in which we can see some cooperation among these countries.
Thank you. We've got some other questions that are coming in through the chat box, and bear with me, my bifocals don't quite bring up the right size on these things. So Sunaina Karki asks, with the rise of minilateralism as an emerging as a preferred format for states to meet the challenge of great power competition, how might diplomacy evolve to match the shifting security landscapes of the coming decade? And how effective are multilateralism how effective is minilateralism as a tool to deal with the rising hybrid threats and gray zone? Who would like to tackle that? Everyone's jumping in at the same time. Yes, I want that one. All right, Peter, I'm going to assign it to you. You get us started.
Great. Yeah, and I was just about to jump in as well. I just unmuted myself. Well, I don't know the answer to the question, but I know it's going to be a test of the concept. I mean, the whole point of rules-based order, if it means anything, it means, you know, sovereignty, equality between sovereign nations, a push against kind of domination by great powers. So the role of these kind of minilateral initiatives is going to be a core test of that. Is the role of small powers and their ability to set rules that then great powers respect. Is that going to exist in the Indo-Pacific? I have to say that I'm skeptical. I mean, I think the shift towards great power competition, which has been explicitly adopted by the United States, and I think, you know, China views itself as a great power with great ambitions. You know, I think it's going to be very difficult to balance the great power competition with the success of these so-called minilateral initiatives, kind of led by the smaller and middle powers. I would love to be wrong on that, and I would love the Indo-Pacific to be a truly rules-based order where small and middle powers can engage in these minilateral exercises and set rules and be respected and be kind of meaningful stakeholders. But I guess we will find out.
Other perspectives?
Can I add a few words about it, if
Please.
it's possible? As for the gray zone, you know that Japan has very many territorial issues with the neighboring countries. One of them is with China over Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. And as you know, Japan has no army but the self-defense forces. So it's now going to expand the rights to act for self-defense forces in so-called gray zone. Like if China attacks Japan in the area of Senkaku or something like that, they will have to act, not to wait for the help from the US, but to act by themselves. And that may turn pacifist constitution of Japan and Japan as a state to a very, not that, the state it was in the past, but to some, let me say, dangerous kind of state. So if we use minilateralism here, Japan sees that as the bilateral problem with China. And I don't think that it will take into account world's opinion or opinion of very large, world organization on that, because it uses as a threat to its own security. So I don't think it is effective here. So that's only my point of view like that.
Thank you. Anyone else care to tackle that one?
Yeah, Dr. Rockwell, I would like to go. Yeah,
Please.
I would, thank you. I would say that it has both pros and cons. We have seen multilateralism, whether in terms of Quad and so many other initiatives. I think it has given these so-called middle powers a chance to play an important role in the international relations. Because till now it was always like in terms whether it was Cold War, bipolarity, unipolarity, a lot of talk about multipolarity. But I think minilateralism has actually given a chance to these middle powers to play a very critical role in international relations in different domains. So I would say that is one aspect. At the same time, when we talk about the conflicts like hybrid threats or gray zone, then I would say these are genuine conflicts, especially with the advancement in technology and not confined to the conventional weapons in terms of cyber attacks or other negative impact of technology in terms of war zone. So I would say that multilateralism can be a success even in dealing with these issues because not everything, as we have seen, can be the responsibility, or we cannot depend on one country. When we talk of multipolarity, that means we owe something to the world in terms of playing our own important role. And all the countries, whether it's European Union or the initiatives or other initiatives, they have an important role and they have a willingness perhaps to play a more important role, go beyond the regional dynamics to the international dynamics. So I think multilateralism also gives them that chance to play a critical role in this. These are my views.
Thank you. Anything more? Mr.
Yes,
Guerin?
please.
Yes, please.
Yes. And I think from my point of view, of course, this also represents good opportunities for middle powers. For example, we may call it not selective multilateral. It will lead us from the unilateralism to balance multilateralism. And it is built, in my view, on the basis of cooperation, the Indo-Pacific middle powers, in order to strengthen the influence in their zones of responsibility. For example, Australia in the South Pacific, India in the Indian Ocean region, and Japan maybe in the Southeast Asia. And of course, this strategy will give the middle power an opportunity to gain a stronger position in their zone of influence, stretching relations with the other influential middle powers and credibility, including to become together in the single voice of the Indo-Pacific region or promote its security and economic stability. And of course, they're reducing dependence on the great powers. The United States or China would give the middle powers the opportunity to choose a more independent and flexible foreign policy vector based on inclusive, more viable and diversified regional institutions in the post-pandemic world. And of course, moreover, they will be able to act as the mediators in easing tensions between the Washington and Beijing, rather than to be the parties of the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Aparajita, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yes, sir. In the era of international politics, when there is multipolarity, emergence of multipolarity, so in my views, multilateralism, it can play an important role where intergovernmental, they can connect and they can work on different issues. That is at the global level and regional level as well.
Thank you. Dr. Sarkar, are you still with us? Would you like to chime in? I guess she's still not with us. Okay, so we have another question. This one comes to us from Sagar Yong Karki, who asks, can the U.S. Indo-Pacific Strategy be seen as a counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative? And as we see increasing investment plans by the United States in Asian countries like Nepal in the form of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And I would tack a little bit onto that. We've seen other countries that kind of fit into this same position, Sri Lanka, for example, who have been offered MCC money and have rejected it in the face of the BRI and pressure from China. So what then does this say about what the Belt and Road is, and whether or not, Dr. Parajita, you brought up the idea of sovereignty being very important, and the being critically important also then for nations to kind of flex their ability to kind of fit in both camps, take a little bit of BRI money, take a little bit of MCC money. But in Sri Lanka, that ended up not being the case, right? Colombo rejected the MCC money, and then is, of course, as a result, seen as having fallen into that debt trap. So there's obviously a delicate balancing act that has to go on in places like Kathmandu and Dhaka, and places that are kind of stuck in the middle there. So if you could kind of get us started on this, what does this say for powers the size of Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Nepal and others?
Thank you, sir. So China, it is trying to, through its policies, what it's trying to see that those countries which are not developed in terms of infrastructure and other things. So it is what it's trying to do is, it is encircling other countries through this. It is also making the policy of debt crisis. As we know about Hambantota port, that 90-year lease, it was given in Sri Lanka. So similarly, in other countries also, what it is the basic interest of China, and which the countries are understanding, but after many years or after being late. So other countries like US, India, they are all, definitely they are trying to balance this, because they are also countries at the global level and they want to counter China. So these countries, they are failing in the trap of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which we all know that China is doing for its own benefits as well. If it is developing infrastructure of other countries, other LDCs or developing countries, then it is also working for its own interest, and through that, the country is getting into the crisis of debt.
Thank you. Other perspectives on this? Nobody. Okay. So I've asked the panelists to come up with some questions for one another. Who would like to present one?
Dr. Rockwell, may I quickly add to the previous question about NCC? Sure. Yeah. Well, one, of course, for the small countries or the landlocked countries like Nepal, one balance is very, very critical with a neighbor closely situated like China, and also the kind of investments and other things in terms of BRI. But yes, of course, we have also seen the negative repercussions of that. We have also seen how it actually works in terms of debt crisis. At the same time, I would say that since US is physically distant, so I think geographical or geopolitical implications play a very critical role. Since US is physically distant from Nepal, Nepal can choose at a particular time in terms of accepting or not accepting certain help or certain bilateral, as in terms of NCC. But at the same time, I would also say that if Nepal or any other country for that matter, along with this national interest, protecting its national interest, can balance, then definitely it would be beneficial in terms of automation or space technology or lasers and other biotech, because ultimately all these countries, including Nepal, they also want to be self-sufficient. So I think such initiatives will also pave a way for that. So I think one needs to find a more kind of a balanced approach in order to gain benefit from such offers or such policies.
Thank you. Other perspectives? Okay. Does anyone have questions for their peers? Okay, well, I'll ask another question then. Given that Prime Minister Modi recently had a conversation with President Putin regarding Indian investments in Afghanistan, and obviously quite concerned about the potential under the Taliban of losing all of that that treasure and effort that was put into building up the Republic of Afghanistan. What does this bode for the future of Russian and India relations, and also what does it perhaps signal towards the other Quad members in the aftermath of Afghanistan? Are we going to see India moving then closer to Russia again to try to protect some of those investments? And all of this happening, of course, at a time when us in the U.S., for example, are trying to wean New Delhi away from Moscow in terms of weapons procurement and things of that nature. Very bad timing in my perspective. But what does this conversation signal to Moscow, and what does it signal to the members of the Quad? I can tell I'm going to have to assign work here. Dr. Goriacheva, what does this kind of a conversation say to Moscow?
Thank you for your question. That is quite a little bit far from my area of research, but I will try to answer this question based on, overall situation and trends in recent Russian policy. As I said before, we have quite Europe-oriented diplomacy, but lately Russia started to search to establish ties with, let me say, new old friends like China and like India. All of us know from the historical point of view what good relationship we did have in the 50s and the 60s in the times of Soviet Union. And some geopolitical experts think that now in Russia we expect some kind of what we can call revival of the USSR and maybe some signs of its policy origins and drivers. I think that now that we have Russia is putting more efforts in establishing good relations with the countries that tend to be large powers in the long-term perspective. Now we have, of course, USA as the biggest leader, but from the point of view of population, of economic growth, China and India both can benefit to Russia. I cannot say, as I told before, that Quad plays a significant role in taking into account by Russian policymakers in Moscow, because still Moscow is Europe-oriented. But I think that in the nearest future, we will see some response to that. At least I'm expecting that, because it's a very important direction of policy, not only Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Chhibber, can you perhaps speak to the perspective from New Delhi?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rockwell. Dr. Rockwell, I think there has been a genuine concern with growing India-US relations and also Quad. Definitely, there have been some concerns regarding India-Russia relations, because we have very long, stable relations for a very long time, decades old. At the same time, I would say that during the Afghanistan crisis, or the latest phone call that you're talking about, and also on the sidelines, we also had the BRICS meeting. In all these main issues that were discussed was about having a permanent channel of communication between India and Russia, and also ensuring that terrorist activities, anti-India activities are not, they do not take place on the soil of Afghanistan, especially after the Talibanization. Definitely, these are major areas of concern, and how India looks at Russia is a trend which definitely can help in these areas. And if you talk about concerns in the US or Indo-US relations, then I would say that perhaps India is not exactly non-aligned at the moment. It is kind of maintaining a balance, a good relations with US, at the same time trying to maintain relations with Russia, and also Russia's little tilt or movement towards Pakistan. That is another area that was of little concern that we have seen So I think, yes, there have been certain debates on this issue, but in the present circumstance, one, our relations with Russia, or dialogue with Russia in the present context of Afghanistan will definitely not affect our relations with the US, or for that matter in the Quad, because this is a genuine crisis, and BRICS and Russia being part of that area can definitely, India and Russia can work out in terms of ensuring non-terrorist activities, or also ensuring that Afghanistan is not used, because it's a major concern at present.
Thank you. Other perspectives?
Sir, may I?
Yes, please.
Sir, what I think is that in international relations, there can be no permanent friend or enemy. When India signed 20 years peace and friendship treaty with Soviet Union, that was the need of time in 1971, because at one side we had Pakistan, USA, and China, and other side India needed help of a superpower. So it approached the Soviet Union. So similarly, we cannot have all weather friends, that once we are friend, we will be friend. It's not like that. In international relations, we have to work according to our own national interest, and seeing the situation that is flowing in at the global level. So that is what I wanted to add.
Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in? No? Does anybody have questions for one another? Last chance. Okay, let me just check the chat box real quick and make sure that we don't have anything there. Okay, we do have one other question. And this again comes from Nimish Babu Oli, who asks, how will the countries of the US, and I think they mean the Quad, it says Indo-Pacific Strategy, but I believe they mean the Quad. How will they deal with China to address the common global challenges like climate change, terrorism, and other issues? We got about 10 more minutes to address that. And nobody wants to take it. Okay. I know Peter has stepped out. His kids have woke up, and he's got to keep an eye on them for the minute. So I'll since I've been kind of quiet, I'll take a stab at this one. Obviously, the Washington wants the Quad to be more than just a military alliance, even though that's probably the one dimension of the equation that gets the most attention in the press. It's supposed to be a diplomatic, informational, military, and economic cooperation package. And I think then what we would hope for then would be to come up with some, as we institutionalize the Quad, assuming that we get to, that we would tackle these issues in a unified sort of way. Obviously, terrorism is a very pressing issue right now with the fall of Afghanistan to, what is essentially a terrorist organization. And it looks like the situation there is going to devolve into a civil war once again between different terrorist factions within the country, with the folks there, the innocent folks there, kind of caught in the middle of all of it. And obviously, this has ramifications for South Asia and Central Asia, where do we see more cross-border incursions through Afghanistan and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir, for example, into India? Do we see a spreading of that ideology into Central Asia and back into Pakistan from whence it came? And how does that impact everything? And that's something that we have to come up with a unified approach to dealing with, because if India is under constant threat of greater attack and whatnot, their attention is going to go elsewhere rather than to institutionalizing the Quad. Climate change, I'm probably not the best person to talk about that, but obviously it's again something that has been tackled on the multilateral stage more than it has on the individual countries. because if we reduce our carbon footprint and somebody else doesn't, then it doesn't really do us a whole heck of a lot of good. So that's something that will have to be negotiated, I think, amongst the member states as well. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. I want to thank the panelists. We covered a wide array of different topics, and I know some of the questions that were thrown at you were only tangentially probably related to your area of expertise or that you were presenting on. Excellent presentations, all of them, and I think we really gave our audience a wide ranging perspective on what exactly this new Indo-Pacific construct is. And perhaps a little bit of idea of where it's headed. I also want to thank, obviously, NICE for organizing this event and for having enough confidence in me to hand me the responsibility for chairing this panel. And I look forward to future collaborations with each of you. And I want to thank, too, the audience. We had a lot of good questions come in from the audience. And, without audience participation, these things are kind of just an echo chamber to some extent. So it's very beneficial, and we appreciate it very much. And with that, I would say it's time to wrap things up and hand it over to the next crew that's coming on behind us. And thanks again from here in very early America. Hope you're all doing well. And thanks again. Namaskar.
Thank you, Dr. Rockwell.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Rockwell. With this, we come to the end of the session. So we'll be moving on to the next session. So to officially end the session, I would like to request Nimesh to please play the video. Vote of thanks.
Distinguished Chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we have come to the end of this session, we would like to express a sincere gratitude and thanks to the Chair for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, we must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for the audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching us live. Thank you for your valuable time and attention and for making this session productive with your questions. Once again, we are truly honored to have you all with us today. Please do join us in the next session. Thank you so much.